My name is Natalie Harper. I'm 28 years old. And the night my fiancé asked for an open relationship did not begin with screaming. It began with a silence so strange, so unnatural, that by the time he finally said the words out loud, I think some part of me had already started grieving. If you had looked at my life a month before that conversation, you probably would have called it settled in the best possible way. Not flashy, not dramatic, not one of those relationships people perform online with curated date nights and matching captions about soulmates and sunsets. What Evan and I had felt quieter than that, more lived in, more real. We had been together for 5 years, long enough to know each other's coffee orders, stress tells, childhood stories, and the exact kind of silence that meant comfort instead of distance. We met in college during sophomore year. At the time, I was majoring in communications and picking up every side job I could find because I hated asking my parents for money. Evan was studying business, and he had that kind of easy confidence that made people turn toward him without realizing they were doing it. He was funny without trying too hard, charming without feeling fake, and patient in a way that made you feel seen instead of handled. We started off as friends. Then we became the kind of friends who somehow spent every evening together. Then one night, after a campus movie screening neither of us had actually paid attention to, he walked me back to my apartment and kissed me under a broken street lamp that made the whole moment look softer than it was. I still remember how surprised I was by how natural it felt, like I had not fallen into something new, like I had stepped into something that had been waiting for us for a while. After that, everything moved. The way serious relationships do, when two people are still young enough to romanticize struggle and old enough to start building anyway. We graduated. We found jobs. We moved in together. We learned how to split rent, groceries, laundry, and unspoken responsibilities. We learned which arguments mattered and which ones were really just about being tired, hungry, broke, or overwhelmed. We learned each other in the unglamorous places: bills, traffic, illness, family obligations, burnout, the slow repetition of adulthood. And somehow, through all of that, I loved him more. Last year, he proposed. Nothing extravagant. No flash mob. No hidden photographer, no crowded restaurant waiting to clap. It happened in our apartment on a Thursday night after takeout and bad reality TV. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, rinsing off chopsticks, when he came up behind me and asked, in a voice so steady it made me turn around immediately, if I wanted to keep doing life with him forever. Then he got down on one knee. I cried before he even finished the question. Of course I said yes. After that, our future started feeling less like an idea and more like a series of practical conversations. We talked about neighborhoods, mortgage rates, whether we wanted one kid or two, whether we should get a dog before children or after. We argued lightly about names we might never use. We bookmarked furniture. We joked about paint colors like that kind of domestic nonsense was the most natural thing in the world. That was what made everything that came later so hard to process. I was not just losing a fiancé. I was losing a version of my life that had already begun to take shape around him. About 3 weeks before everything ended, Evan left for a guy's trip with a few of his closest friends. It was supposed to be a break, a reset. They had been planning it for months. A full week away, some lake house one of his friend's uncles owned, a lot of drinking, grilling, late nights, and whatever version of male bonding required terrible group photos and stories. No one ever told quite the same way twice. Before he left, everything felt normal. He was excited, relaxed. He kissed me in the kitchen while tossing chargers and deodorant into an overstuffed duffel bag. He kept asking me what he should pack, like I had any idea what men wore to sit around a fire and lie to each other about fantasy football. He told me not to work too hard while he was gone. I told him not to do anything stupid. He laughed and said that was setting impossible standards. I remember standing in the doorway when he left, one hand on the strap of his bag, the other reaching back to pull me in for one more kiss. "Miss me a little," he said. "Only a little?" I asked. He smirked. "Enough to remember I'm the fun one in this relationship." I rolled my eyes and told him to go before he made me regret agreeing to this trip in the first place. He grinned, then he left. And for that entire week, nothing seemed wrong. He texted me enough that I did not worry. Not constantly, but enough. A picture of the lake, a complaint about his friend Marcus snoring like a chainsaw, a blurry late-night shot of beer bottles on a deck railing. A message saying, "Wish you were here," immediately followed by, "Actually, no, because then I'd have to share the good whiskey." It all felt like us. So when he came home and everything felt off immediately, I noticed. Some people think betrayal announces itself loudly, that it arrives with lipstick on a collar, an obvious lie, a slammed door, a message seen at the wrong time. But sometimes it enters the room like a draft. Small, invisible, easy to dismiss until you realize you have been cold for hours. That was what it felt like when Evan came back. He walked through the apartment door with his overnight bag slung over one shoulder and his sunglasses still pushed up in his hair. I smiled and crossed toward him automatically, already halfway into a hug. But he barely returned it. Not rudely, not obviously, just enough for the moment to land wrong. His arms came around me a second too late. His body was there, but his attention wasn't. It felt like hugging someone whose mind was still somewhere else. "How was it?" I asked. He gave a shrug that seemed too casual to be real. "Good. Fun." That was it. No story, no grin. No, you would not believe what happened. No replay of drunken stupidity from the trip. Normally, if we had been apart for more than 2 days, he came home overflowing. Details, jokes, complaints. Half the fun for him was retelling everything dramatically. But that afternoon, he stepped past me, left his bag by the door, and went straight to the bedroom like he was trying to outrun conversation. I stood there for a second, staring at the abandoned duffel bag. Then I told myself not to be ridiculous. Maybe he was tired. Maybe the drive back had been long. Maybe he just needed a shower and sleep and one night to recalibrate. That explanation lasted until dinner. We ordered food because I figured neither of us wanted to cook. I set the containers out on the coffee table, curled up at one end of the couch, and waited for him to slide back into the easy rhythm we always had after time apart. Instead, he picked at his food and scrolled through his phone. Not checked it, scrolled it, continuously. His eyes kept dropping to the screen between bites. His thumb moved even when I was talking. When I asked a question, there was a beat too long before he answered, like he was returning from somewhere farther away than a text thread. "Tough re-entry?" I asked lightly. He glanced up. "What?" "Back from vacation. Real life again. You seem out of it." He gave a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. "Just tired." I nodded. But inside, something tightened. Because the truth was, tired Evan was still usually affectionate. Tired Evan leaned against me. Tired Evan put his head in my lap and asked me to scratch his scalp like an oversized golden retriever. Tired Evan did not feel like a locked room. The next few days only made it worse. He was on his phone constantly. Morning, night, in the kitchen, in the bathroom, sitting beside me on the couch, standing at the sink, pretending to rinse a mug that had been clean for 30 seconds. And it was not only the frequency that stood out, it was the way his body changed around it, the way he angled the screen away from me without seeming to realize he was doing it, the way conversations died the second I entered the room, the way he started setting it face down when he never used to care. I noticed the missing affection too. No hand at the small of my back while passing in the hallway. No absent-minded kisses on my temple. No reaching for me in bed. Not even the little things people do when closeness has become muscle memory. It was as if an invisible wall had risen inside the apartment, and only one of us knew exactly when it had been built. I tried to be reasonable. That is the humiliating part sometimes. How reasonable you become while someone else is quietly making you feel crazy. I told myself relationships had phases. I told myself not every strange week meant disaster. I told myself not to turn discomfort into accusation, just because my instincts were louder than my evidence. So I gave him space. I let an evening pass without pressing. Then another. Then another. By the fourth day, the silence had started to feel insulting. That night after dinner, I found him rinsing a plate in the kitchen, shoulders tense, face expressionless, in that way people get when they think neutral is the same as unreadable. I dried my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "Are you going to tell me what's wrong?" He did not turn right away. "Nothing's wrong." The answer came too quickly. Too clean. I watched him set the plate down in the drying rack before finally facing me. "You've been acting weird since you got back," I said. "If something's bothering you, just say it." He exhaled through his nose. "Nat, you're overthinking it." There it was. The sentence people use when they want your instincts to feel like a personality flaw. I folded my arms. "Am I?" His jaw shifted. "I'm just tired. Work's been a lot. The trip kind of threw me off, that's all." I stared at him. 5 years teaches you the difference between discomfort and dishonesty. It teaches you where someone looks when they are embarrassed, how their voice changes when they are hiding something, what kind of silence means they are overwhelmed versus what kind means they are editing themselves in real time. And he was editing. I let it go anyway. Not because I believed him, because I could feel, with the dread of someone hearing ice crack underfoot, that whatever was coming was bigger than one forced kitchen conversation. A few more days passed. The pattern sharpened. Late-night texts. Phone face down. Detached answers. Once, I came into the living room and he turned the screen off so fast it almost looked rehearsed. Another night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and found the other side of the bed empty. He was in the living room, sitting in darkness except for the light from his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked sleepily from the doorway. He jerked like I had caught him doing something wrong. "Yeah," he said, "couldn't sleep." He came back to bed a minute later, but the air between us felt stranger than before. Looking back now, I think part of me already knew something big was coming. Not the specifics, not the exact shape of it, but I knew I was standing at the edge of a conversation that would separate my life into before and after. It happened 2 nights later. He came home from work quieter than usual. Not distracted this time, deliberate, which somehow was worse. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open, half answering emails and half watching some home renovation show neither of us actually liked. He set his keys down in the bowl by the door, loosened his tie, and stood there for a second like he was waiting for courage to arrive. Then he said, "Can we talk?" My stomach dropped so fast it almost hurt. There are certain phrases that never mean anything good. We need to talk. Sit down. Don't freak out. I remember staring at him and thinking, absurdly, that maybe someone had died. That maybe he had lost his job. That maybe there was some explanation still big enough to justify the last 2 weeks. I closed the laptop slowly. "Okay," I said. He sat at the opposite end of the couch instead of beside me. That detail still bothers me. Not because of the distance itself, but because it felt intentional. Strategic. Like he wanted room between us before he said whatever he had come home rehearsing. The apartment was quiet except for the muted television. I reached for the remote and turned it off. Suddenly the silence felt sharp enough to cut. He was fidgeting with his hands, rubbing one thumb over the side of the other, in a repetitive motion I had only seen when he was deeply anxious or trying to say something he knew would land badly. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said. I waited. About us. About our relationship. A strange chill moved through me. "Okay," I said carefully. "Thinking what?" He looked down at his hands, then back up, then somewhere past my shoulder. It was the avoidance that got me first. Not the words, not yet. The fact that he could not look directly at me and still seemed determined to continue. "I just think," he said slowly, "maybe there are ways we could make things better, stronger." I frowned. "What's wrong with them now?" "Nothing is wrong," he said quickly. "That's not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" He inhaled, held it for a second, then let it out. "When I was away with the guys, some conversations came up about relationships, what works for people, different kinds of arrangements, different ways people stay connected long term." My pulse started to pound. I did not understand yet, not fully, but I understood enough to feel fear rising before the words even arrived. "Different arrangements?" I repeated. He nodded once. His voice, when he spoke again, had that overly measured quality people use when they are trying to present something wrecking ball serious as if it were mature and reasonable. "I think," he said, "we should consider an open relationship." For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. The sentence did not fit inside my reality. It hovered there, absurd and obscene, like something spoken in the wrong house to the wrong woman in the wrong life. I stared at him. What?" He swallowed. "I know it sounds like a lot." "A lot?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. "You think?" He started talking again, too calmly, too carefully, like he had practiced this enough times to smooth all the rough edges off it before bringing it to me. He said it was about honesty, freedom, growth, trust. I sat there feeling the ground shift beneath everything I thought I knew. And in that moment, before the argument had even really begun, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. Whatever happened next, nothing between us was ever going back to the way it had been. For a few seconds after Evan said it, I could not feel my hands. That sounds dramatic, but it is the truth. My whole body went strangely still, like every system inside me had paused to confirm whether what I had just heard was real, or whether I had somehow slipped into one of those stress dreams where nothing makes sense and everyone else behaves like it does. An open relationship. From my fiancé, the man who had asked me to marry him in our kitchen. The man I had spent 5 years building a private language with. The man I had trusted enough to imagine children with. I stared at him so long that he shifted in his seat. "Natalie," he said carefully, "I know this is probably not what you expected me to say." I laughed once. Not because anything about it was funny. Because sometimes your body rejects pain by turning it into the wrong sound. "No," I said. "No, it definitely wasn't." He sat forward slightly, elbows on his knees, like that posture alone might make him look more sincere. "I need you to just hear me out." That made something inside me harden. Because people only ask to be heard out when they know what they are saying is already a kind of harm. I folded my arms across my chest, partly to steady myself, partly because I suddenly could not stand the thought of being physically open to him while he was talking about opening our relationship to other people. "Then explain it," I said. "Explain it in a way that makes any sense." He nodded, almost with relief, like he was grateful I had given him a script cue. "When I was away," he began, "some of the guys started talking about relationships, and not in a stupid cheating kind of way. More like how people can be committed without being so boxed in. How some couples are making things work by being more honest about attraction and freedom instead of pretending one person can be everything forever." I blinked at him. The more he spoke, the worse it sounded. Not only because of the content, but because of the tone. Polished, careful, almost academic, like he was presenting a TED Talk on emotional innovation instead of telling his fiancée he wanted permission to sleep with other women. "Freedom," I repeated flatly. "Is that what this is?" "I'm saying maybe people define commitment too narrowly," he said. "Maybe there are healthier ways to do it." I stared at him in disbelief. "We're engaged." "I know." We were planning a wedding. I know that too. We've been talking about houses, kids, our future. I know, Natalie. Then why, I said, my voice rising despite myself, are you sitting here acting like the natural next step after 5 years together is bringing strangers into our relationship? He flinched slightly at the word strangers, but he did not back down. It's not about replacing you. I let out a sharp breath. That is not comforting. He dragged a hand over his face, frustration flickering through the composure. I'm trying to be honest with you. No, I said. You're trying to control how this lands. His eyes snapped to mine. What is that supposed to mean? It means you've clearly been thinking about this for a while, I said. Long enough to come home with talking points. Long enough to package it as growth and honesty and freedom. And now you're saying it to me like this is some brave conversation instead of the kind of thing that detonates a relationship. He opened his mouth, then closed it. That tiny hesitation told me more than anything else had so far. I leaned forward. How long? He frowned. What? How long have you been thinking about this? He looked away for a second. I don't know. A little while. A little while, I repeated. That could mean anything. He exhaled sharply. I didn't come in here to fight. I felt something almost hysterical rise in my throat. That was the thing about people who do the hurting. They always act offended when the wound reacts. You didn't come in here to fight, I said. Evan, you came in here and told me you want an open relationship. What exactly did you picture happening next? That I'd nod and thank you for being involved? His jaw tightened. I knew you'd react strongly. Oh, good. So this is you prepared. That's not fair. I laughed again, softer this time, colder. No. Fair would have been not blindsiding me with this after 5 years. Fair would have been telling me the second you started doubting the kind of relationship we had. Fair would have been not letting me plan a future with a man who was apparently busy redefining commitment behind my back. His face changed at that, just slightly, not guilt exactly, more like irritation that I had named the part he wanted to keep vague. It's not like that, he said. Then tell me what it is like. He stood up suddenly and paced 2 steps toward the kitchen, then turned back around. He was agitated now, which at least felt more honest than the careful calm from before. I'm saying I love you, he said. I'm saying I'm committed to you. But maybe commitment doesn't have to mean ownership. Maybe it doesn't have to mean shutting down every other part of ourselves forever. I stared at him. There it was again. The language. Ownership. Ourselves. Forever. Big abstract words built to make his desire sound philosophical instead of personal. I stood too. Who have you been talking to? He blinked. What? Besides the guys. Who have you been talking to that suddenly has you speaking like a podcast host in a black turtleneck? His face tightened. Can you not mock me for 2 seconds? Can you not insult me for 2 hours? He looked genuinely offended. I am trying to be honest with you. And I am trying to understand why my fiancé came back from a trip talking like monogamy is emotional oppression. That shut him up for a moment. We stood there in this living room, the coffee table between us, both breathing harder now, the distance no longer quiet, but charged. Then I asked the question that had been building in me from the moment he first mentioned freedom. Is there someone else? His eyes widened instantly, too instantly. No. The answer was fast, almost reflexive. My stomach turned. You didn't even think before answering. Because there's no one else. Then where is this coming from? I told you, conversations, perspectives, just thinking. Thinking about what? I demanded. Sleeping with other people while staying engaged to me? Having me at home while you explore? His mouth tightened. That's a really cynical way to put it. It is also a very accurate one. He looked away again. And that, more than anything, made me want to scream. Because if you are telling the truth, you look at the person you love when you tell it. Even if it is hard. Especially if it is hard. You met someone, I said quietly. No. You're interested in someone. No. You already have someone in mind. He shook his head, but he still would not hold my gaze. I could hear my own heartbeat. Look at me and say it. That got his eyes back on mine. There is no one else, he said. The words were firmer this time, more deliberate, and still, somehow, less convincing. I studied his face the way you study a sentence in a contract when you already know the truth is hiding in the wording. Then are you unhappy? I asked. That question seemed to surprise him. What? In this relationship with me? Are you unhappy? His face softened a little then, and for 1 weak, humiliating second, I thought maybe this was the part where he broke, the part where he admitted he was lost or scared or spiraling, the part where the truth, however ugly, would finally sound human. But instead he shook his head. No, I'm not unhappy. Then what is missing? I don't know if anything is missing, he said, and even he sounded uncertain now. I just think after being together this long, it's normal to ask whether there are other ways to keep growing instead of getting stuck. I could not believe what I was hearing. Stuck. He opened his hands. That's not what I mean. You literally just said it. You know what I'm trying to say. No, I said. Actually, I don't. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're bored with commitment and trying to rebrand it as personal growth. That hit him. I could see it. His face hardened. That's not fair either. And asking your fiancé for an open relationship is? You keep framing it like I cheated. The room went silent for a second, not because of the sentence itself, because of how revealing it was. I narrowed my eyes. I did not say you cheated. He froze, only for a second. But it was enough. It was one of those awful human moments when a person answers the accusation they were most afraid of instead of the words actually spoken aloud. I felt something cold move through me. You thought that fast. What? You jumped right to cheating. Natalie, you jumped right there. His voice sharpened. Because that's what this sounds like when you say it like that. No, I said softly. That's what it sounds like to you. He swore under his breath and turned away from me again. At that point, I knew with dreadful certainty that there was more happening under the surface than he was willing to admit. Maybe not a full affair, maybe not something physical yet, but something, a thought, a flirtation, an emotional door already cracked open somewhere he expected me never to notice. I sat back down because suddenly my legs felt weak. He stayed standing. I looked up at him and asked, quieter this time, "Did you ever think about what this would do to me?" His expression changed then. Not enough, but some. Of course I did. Did you? I asked. Because it feels like you spent a lot more time thinking about how to make this sound reasonable than how it would actually feel for the person sitting across from you. He rubbed the back of his neck, pacing once more before finally sitting down again, though still not close to me. I didn't want to lie to you, he said. I stared at him in exhaustion. That sentence. That noble little sentence. People love to hide behind it when they want credit for confessing a cruelty they have already fully considered. So your options were what? I asked. Lie to me or ask me to help you dismantle the relationship myself. That's not what I'm asking. Then what are you asking? He hesitated, and I realized with a sick certainty that he had spent all this time scripting the pitch, but not the reality that would follow if I said yes. Boundaries, rules, names, dates, bodies, humiliation. He had not thought that far because the fantasy had never been about partnership. It had been about access. I'm asking you to think about it, he said finally. I just looked at him. That's it? I know you need time. You are right, I said. I do. He seemed to relax a fraction, mistaking my calm for openness. That was when I stood up and walked to the bedroom. I did not slam the door. I did not cry immediately. I just sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and stared at nothing. The room still looked like our room. His hoodie over the chair, his watch on the dresser, the framed photo from our beach trip last summer. Tilted slightly because he always bumped it and never fixed it. All those ordinary objects suddenly felt staged, like props from a life that had been canceled without warning. I tried to replay everything. The guy's trip, the weird distance, the phone, the language, the way he answered too quickly, the way he could not look at me, the way he said stuck like he was describing a job, not a future with the woman he claimed to love. Part of me wanted to walk back out there and keep interrogating him until the whole rotten truth spilled loose. Part of me wanted to throw up. Part of me, the saddest part, the part I hate admitting existed, wanted to find a way to make his words less damaging than they were, to translate them into confusion instead of betrayal, to find some version of events where the man I loved was still basically himself, just temporarily stupid. But that part of me kept running into the same wall. He had asked, maybe other people think the betrayal begins with action. For me, it began with permission, with the fact that he had gone somewhere without me, entertained a future without the kind of loyalty we had promised each other, come home and asked me to bless it. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a revelation. I sat there for close to an hour. At one point, I heard him moving around in the living room, heard the soft thud of him sitting, standing, sitting again, heard the muted buzz of his phone, heard water running briefly in the kitchen. He did not come after me. That told its own story, too. Eventually, I stood, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bright in that dangerous way people's eyes get when the crying has not started yet, but the shock has moved into something sharper. And in that mirror, I knew. Not every detail, not every lie, but enough. When I walked back into the living room, Evan was sitting on the couch looking down at his phone again. That detail, that stupid, ugly detail, nearly finished me. Because even after all of that, even after dropping a grenade into our life, he had still retreated into the same glowing screen that had been distancing him from me for days. He looked up when I entered. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I said very clearly, I can't do this. He straightened slightly. Natalie. No, I said. Listen carefully. I can't do this. I am not doing an open relationship. I'm not considering it. I'm not taking time to warm up to it. I'm not going to sit around and workshop ways for my fiancé to betray me more politely. His face tightened. That's not what I'm asking. It is exactly what you're asking. You're twisting it. I stared at him. No, I said. I am stripping the euphemisms off it. He set his phone down on the coffee table, irritation breaking fully through now. You don't have to be cruel. Cruel? I almost laughed again. You come home and tell me you want an open relationship and I'm the cruel one? I said I wanted us to talk about it. And I am answering. He crossed his arms. You're making a permanent decision in one night. My voice dropped lower then, steadier. No, you made it the second you decided this was something you needed enough to bring into our home. Something flickered across his face then. Panic, maybe. Or the first real sign that he understood I was not just hurt. I was done. Natalie, he said, softer now, I'm not saying I don't want you. The sentence was so insulting in its construction that it snapped the last thread of restraint I had left. You should hear yourself. He blinked. What? You should hear how that sounds. Like I'm supposed to be grateful that I'm still included in the plan. That's not... 5 years, I said, and now my voice shook despite how hard I was trying to keep it steady. 5 years, Evan. We built a life together. We got engaged. We talked about children. I trusted you. And now you're sitting there asking me to consider opening our relationship like this is some thoughtful evolution instead of you blowing a hole through everything we built. He looked stricken then, finally, but I did not care. Please don't do this, he said. The audacity of that almost stunned me. Don't do what? Throw everything away over one conversation. I went very still, because there it was, the minimizing, the sanitizing, the insistence that what had happened was only painful because of my reaction to it. Throw everything away, I repeated. You really think that's what I'm doing? I didn't mean it like that. No, I said. You mean exactly what you said. He stood up too fast, hands open now, eyes glossy with something that might have been desperation. I love you. I looked at him and felt heartbreak move through me like a blade. Because I believed that part. I believed he loved me in the way many selfish people do. Sincerely, but not cleanly. Deeply, but not enough to stop centering himself. Enough to want to keep me. Not enough to protect me. And somehow that made it worse. I need you to pack a bag, I said. He stared at me. What? You heard me. His face drained. You're kicking me out? Yes. Natalie, come on. No. It was a conversation. It was the end. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. For the first time that night, he looked genuinely afraid. You're being serious. I held his gaze. Yes. He swallowed hard. Over this? I gave him a long, exhausted look. That was the problem, right there. That tiny phrase. Over this. As if this were a minor disagreement, a budgeting fight, an awkward comment at dinner. Not the revelation that the man I planned to marry no longer believed in the same relationship I was standing inside. Yes, I said again. Over this. His eyes filled. Whether from guilt, panic, or the simple shock of consequences, I did not know. I didn't mean for it to go like this, he said, voice breaking. I felt my own throat tighten, but I would not soften. Not now. Not when softness was exactly the thing that would be used to drag this out into something even uglier. You should have thought about that before you came home and asked me to share you. He flinched like I had slapped him. Then he wiped at his face angrily, turned, and walked to the bedroom. I stood in the living room while he packed. I could hear drawers opening, closet doors sliding, hangers scraping. Once, the sound stopped completely, and I knew he was standing in there staring at our things, probably trying to process how quickly a future can collapse when the truth finally gets spoken out loud. I did not go in. I did not help. A few minutes later, he came back out with a duffel bag over his shoulder. Not everything. Just enough for the night. Enough to make the departure real without making the breakup feel complete. He stopped near the front door. His face was blotchy now, eyes red. Is this really it? He asked. I looked at him, and in that moment I saw both versions of him at once. The boy who kissed me under a broken street lamp. The man who came home asking for more than my love and less than my dignity. It is, I said. He stood there for another second, like maybe I would change my mind if he stayed still long enough. I didn't. Finally, he opened the door. The hallway light spilled across the floor. Then he stepped out and disappeared. The door clicked shut behind him. And just like that, the apartment went silent. Not peaceful. Not relieved. Just silent in that brutal way spaces become when a life has been interrupted, but not yet cleared away. His shoes were still by the entry mat. His jacket was still on the hook. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom. His half-read book was still face down on the side table. Everywhere I looked, there were traces of a future that had not realized it was already dead. I sat down slowly on the couch and stared at the space where he had been sitting when he asked me to open our relationship like it was an invitation to evolve instead of an admission that something in him had already left. And the only thought that kept circling back, over and over, was this. He did not lose me when I told him to leave. He lost me long before that. He just hadn't understood it yet. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating itself across the nightstand. At first, I thought I had overslept for work. My body was heavy, my eyes swollen, my throat raw in that strange way it gets after a night when you do not remember crying, but know you must have. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, caught in that thin space between sleep and memory. Then the phone buzzed again, and everything came back. Evan, the couch. The words open relationship sitting in the middle of our living room like a lit match dropped on carpet. I reached for my phone and immediately wished I hadn't. His name was everywhere. Missed calls, text messages, 2 voicemails, another call coming in as I stared at the screen. Please talk to me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Can we just have one conversation when we're both calmer? Nat, please. I sat up slowly, blanket pulled in my lap, and read each message with the kind of numb focus people use when they already know nothing inside what they are looking at will make them feel better. What struck me most was how quickly his language had shifted. The night before, he had spoken like a man presenting an idea. Now he sounded like a man trying to run from what the idea had cost him. I played one voicemail. His voice came through low and strained. Hey, I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry. I need you to let me explain this better. Please, I love you. I don't want this to be how we end. I deleted it before it finished. Then I muted the phone and set it face down on the bed. For a long time, I just sat there. The room looked almost the same as it had the morning before, except now everything carried a different weight. The closet door was slightly open. His side of the bed was cold and untouched. The air itself felt altered, like the apartment had absorbed the conversation and was still holding it in the walls. I got up, showered, dressed for work, and moved through my routine with the eerie precision of someone who knows if she stops moving for too long, she might fall apart. I made coffee. I forgot to drink it. I put on mascara and had to wipe it off when my hands started shaking. By the time I left the apartment, my phone had accumulated 6 more texts and another missed call from him. Then, around 10 that morning, the second wave started. Not Evan, his friends. At first, it was one text from Marcus, the same Marcus whose snoring Evan used to joke about. Hey, Nat, heard some of what happened. I'm really sorry. Can we talk? Then another from Tyler. Please don't hate him forever. He handled it badly, but I swear the trip conversations got in his head. Then one from Jason. This is partly on us. We were all talking nonsense. Nobody thought he'd actually bring it up to you like that. I stared at the messages at my desk and felt a hot, sharp kind of anger rise under my skin. Nobody thought he would actually bring it up to you like that. As if that detail made it better. As if the real mistake had been delivery. As if the crime scene was regrettable only because someone had walked me into it too abruptly. I did not answer any of them. At lunch, Marcus called. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered, not because I wanted comfort or clarity from one of Evan's idiot friends, but because anger sometimes wants a witness. Natalie, he said immediately, voice cautious. Hey, thanks for picking up. What? He hesitated. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For real. I know this is a mess. A mess, I repeated. He exhaled. I know that sounds stupid. It sounds small, I said. That's what it sounds like. There was a pause. We were all drinking and talking, he said. Stuff came up, relationships, people we know, couples doing non-traditional things. It got loud. Everybody had opinions. And somehow that led my fiancé to come home and ask to sleep with other people. It wasn't like that. I shut my office door and lowered my voice. Then tell me exactly what it was like. Marcus was quiet long enough for me to know he was about to say something cowardly. I think he got in his own head, he said finally. I think some of the guys made it sound more normal than it is, and he started thinking maybe he was being closed off. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So this is what then? A group delusion? Natalie. No, I'm serious. I want to understand. Did you all sit around a lake house and workshop ways to ruin long-term relationships while calling it emotional honesty? That's not fair. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Not fair. Funny how fairness only seemed to become important once I was the one speaking plainly. You know what's not fair? I said. Spending 5 years with someone, getting engaged, planning a life, and then finding out the people around him were helping normalize the idea that commitment is negotiable. That's not what we were doing. Then maybe you should have thought harder before you all turned my relationship into a debate topic. He apologized again. I told him I was not interested. Then I hung up. For the rest of the day, I kept my head down and worked, because work was measurable and betrayal was not. Work had emails, deadlines, clean responses, and neat little boxes where things belonged. My personal life had turned into fog and splinters. By the time I got home, my mother had already called twice. I knew the second I heard her voice that Evan must have reached out to someone, or maybe I had sounded strange enough on the phone the night before that she had sensed something was wrong. Mama, I'm fine, I said automatically after answering. That is absolutely not true, she said. That almost undid me. Not because of what she said, but because of the steadiness in it. The certainty. Mothers can say one simple sentence and expose every shaky plank you are standing on. So I told her. Not every detail. Not yet, but enough. I told her Evan came home from the trip acting different. I told her he said he wanted an open relationship. I told her I told him to leave. There was silence on the other end. Then my mother said, in a voice so calm it sounded almost regal, "You did the right thing." I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. He said it was about honesty. She made a soft sound that I recognized immediately, the specific sound she made when someone insulted her intelligence. Baby, she said, people love to call selfishness honesty when they want applause for confessing it. I let out a breath that trembled on the way out. She kept talking, and every word felt like someone quietly resetting the furniture inside my head. He came home and asked you to help him lower the standard of your own relationship. That is not modern. That is not enlightened. That is convenient. I pressed my hand to my forehead. His friends are saying they got in his head. Then his head was available for rent, she said flatly. Despite everything, I barked out a surprised laugh. Mom, I mean it. By the time I got off the phone with her, I felt steadier, not healed, not even close, but less alone in my interpretation of what had happened. My father called later that evening. He was not usually the emotional parent. My father loved, through repair work, practical errands, weather reports, and asking whether my tires still had good tread. But when I told him what happened, he got very quiet. Finally, he said, "He asked that after putting a ring on your finger?" "Yes." Another pause. "Then, you don't marry someone while auditioning alternatives." I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the dark window over the sink. That sentence stayed with me. You don't marry someone while auditioning alternatives. Exactly. My family was furious on my behalf, but their anger came with clarity, not chaos. They did not ask whether maybe I misunderstood. They did not urge me to be open-minded. They did not treat my pain like evidence of emotional immaturity. They simply saw what had happened and called it by its name. Evan's family did the opposite. His mother called me 2 days later. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me still believed there were adult ways to close painful things. "Natalie, sweetheart," she said gently, and the tenderness in her tone instantly made me wary. "I heard you and Evan had a terrible misunderstanding." I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to stare at it. A misunderstanding. That word again. That desire to sand down the edges until betrayal could pass as confusion. "With respect," I said, "he asked for an open relationship. That's not a misunderstanding." She sighed softly, the way people do when they think your pain is making you difficult. "He's confused. He's under a lot of pressure. Men sometimes don't know how to express that they're feeling restless or scared about the future. The future. As if his fear of adulthood had somehow made me responsible for swallowing humiliation gracefully. "So I'm supposed to what?" I asked. "Wait while he figures out whether he wants marriage or variety?" "That's not what I'm saying." "It's exactly what you're saying." She grew quieter then, and for a moment I thought maybe I had finally cut through the fog. Instead, she said, "You two had something beautiful. Don't throw it away over one bad conversation." I stared at the wall. There is a kind of loneliness that comes from being hurt. And then there is the sharper loneliness of realizing how many people are willing to reinterpret your hurt as an overreaction if doing so keeps their version of the world intact. "I'm not the one who threw it away," I said. Then I ended the call. His father tried a day later. He was blunter. "People say stupid things when they're scared," he told me. "You don't end an engagement over a hypothetical." A hypothetical. I almost admired the efficiency of it. By the time his family was done, Evan's request had been downgraded from betrayal to misunderstanding to confusion to a hypothetical. If they kept going, I figured eventually someone would classify it as a communication style issue. But the worst conversations came from mutual friends. Not all of them. Some were wonderful. A few texted to say they loved me, believed me, and would not push. A couple even admitted they had never fully trusted the timing of Evan's shift after the trip. But others, especially the ones who loved sounding evolved in group settings and emotionally unavailable in real life, were infuriating. One of them, Noah, asked if we could grab coffee. I should have said no. Instead, I met him because I was still in that dangerous phase where part of me believed context might make things less ugly. It didn't. He stirred his iced coffee for 30 seconds before saying, "I just think maybe you reacted from shock." I stared at him. Of course I reacted from shock. He nodded, like he had scored a point. "Right. So maybe once the shock settles, you'll see that honesty should count for something." I felt the exact moment my patience died. "Honesty is telling your partner the truth before you emotionally leave the relationship," I said. "Not after." He frowned. "That's an assumption." "No," I said, "that's an inference." He leaned back, suddenly taking on that tone people use when they are about to say something stupid and want to disguise it as balance. "I'm just saying, relationships look different now. It's not always black and white." I laughed once and set my coffee down. "The fact that people can choose different relationship structures is not the issue." He blinked. "The issue," I continued, "is that I did not choose that structure. We did not build that kind of relationship. He asked for it after 5 years and an engagement, after acting secretive and distant, and after clearly spending time justifying it to himself before ever mentioning it to me. So no, Noah. This is not a generational philosophy debate. This is my actual life." He looked embarrassed. Good, because I was tired of being the only one expected to sit with discomfort gracefully. Then came the conversation that shifted something in me. It was Anna who texted me. Anna had been close to Evan for years, part of that overlapping circle of college friends who had watched our relationship grow from campus dates to shared rent to wedding planning. She asked if we could talk privately. We met at a quiet wine bar I used to like before everything started reminding me of some version of my life with him. She looked nervous from the second she sat down. After a few minutes of apologizing for not reaching out sooner, she wrapped both hands around her glass and said, There's something I think you should know. Every part of me went still. What? She looked down. A few months ago, during a group hangout, Evan kind of jokingly brought up open relationships. I stared at her. What do you mean jokingly? He phrased it like a hypothetical, she said. Like, do you think people are too rigid about monogamy, that kind of thing? Everyone laughed because it felt random. Somebody made a joke about him trying to start a podcast. It didn't go anywhere. The room around me seemed to dim. A few months ago? She nodded. Not during the trip. Before it. Before the lake house, before the careful language, before the fake spontaneity of that conversation on my couch. He had been testing the idea long before he ever brought it home to me. I sat back slowly. And suddenly so many things rearranged themselves. His confidence that night, the rehearsed tone, the way he had packaged the conversation like he was introducing a concept we should explore instead of admitting a desire he had already been entertaining. The trip had not planted the seed. It had just watered it. Anna kept talking, but it sounded distant for a second, like her words were reaching me through glass. I didn't think much of it at the time, she said. I should have. I'm sorry. I thought it was one of those things people say to sound provocative. I swallowed hard. It means he was thinking about this before he ever said a word to me. She looked miserable. I know. And nobody told me. Her face tightened. Because nobody thought. I held up a hand. I could not hear that sentence again. Nobody thought. That phrase had already done enough damage. I went home that night with my head buzzing. I paced the apartment until almost midnight, barefoot on hardwood floors, arms wrapped around myself so tightly they hurt. I kept replaying the timeline, mentally tugging at it like a knot that had finally begun to loosen, just enough to show the truth underneath. If he had been floating the idea before the trip, then this wasn't impulse. If it wasn't impulse, then the conversation on our couch wasn't honesty. It was escalation. That possibility lodged inside me and would not leave. Because once you know someone has lied by omission, every previous reassurance becomes suspect too. I started asking myself harder questions. Was there really no one else? Why had his phone behavior changed so dramatically? Why did he look panicked when I asked if there was someone? Why had the idea suddenly become urgent enough to bring into our home now? I hated where my thoughts were going, but I hated not knowing even more. For a few days, I lived in a strange in-between state. I did not want him back. That part was clear. But I also could not fully move forward without understanding whether the version of events he gave me had been incomplete, manipulated, or flat-out false. He kept texting. Not as much now, but enough. I'm sorry. Please let me explain. I never wanted to hurt you. Can we just meet once? Most of the messages went unanswered, but they sat there on my phone like knocks on a locked door, and I would be lying if I said they did not wear on me. Not because I missed him in the simple sense, because unanswered questions are exhausting. Because betrayal without explanation leaves the mind clawing at shadows. Because some deep, stubborn part of me wanted to see his face while he tried one more time to tell the story, and maybe catch the moment where it cracked open. My friends were split on whether I should meet him. Some said absolutely not. Others said closure mattered. One night, after pacing my living room until I nearly wore a path into the floor, I called my friend Lena. She listened to me vent for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she said very simply, "You don't owe him forgiveness, but you might owe yourself the truth." I sat down on the arm of the couch. What if he lies? He probably will, she said, at least at first. That almost made me smile. So why go? Because sometimes closure isn't about hearing something comforting. Sometimes it's about confirming what you already know so you can stop doubting yourself. That landed harder than I expected. Stop doubting yourself. Yes, that was the real disease this kind of betrayal creates. Not just heartbreak, self-doubt, the endless inner cross-examination. Did I overreact? Did I miss signs? Am I making it bigger than it was? Is there still something I don't know? By the next afternoon, I had made up my mind. I texted him. One message, nothing more. We can meet once. Public place. He answered almost immediately. Thank you, seriously. Thank you. We settled on a cafe downtown, halfway between my office and the apartment, neutral enough to keep me from feeling cornered and public enough to keep either of us from indulging in theatrics. The whole day of the meeting, I felt wrong in my own skin. Not hopeful. Not afraid exactly. Just alert. Like every nerve ending had been told to stay awake. I got there 10 minutes early. I chose a table near the back but still visible from the counter. Ordered tea I had no intention of drinking. Sat with both hands wrapped around the paper cup and watched people come and go through the front windows. Every time the door opened, my chest tightened. By the time he finally walked in, I had already rehearsed a dozen versions of how the conversation might go. Maybe he would finally tell the truth. Maybe he would try to cry his way around it. Maybe he would act wounded. Maybe he would apologize in a way that sounded real enough to reopen the part of me I was trying to protect. What I did know, with a clarity that had been missing the night he left, was this. I was not there to save the relationship. I was there to see if the truth had a face. And the second he sat down across from me, pale, tired, and careful, I knew one thing instantly. He had come prepared, which meant so had I. Evan looked worse than he had the night I told him to leave. His hair was slightly messy, like he had run his hands through it too many times. There were shadows under his eyes. His jaw looked tighter, rough with the kind of stubble men get when their routine starts slipping. If I had seen him on another day, in another context, I might have felt tenderness first. That was the cruelest part of long relationships. Love does not vanish on command just because trust does. It lingers. It humiliates. It makes you notice the exhaustion in the face of the person who hurt you, and instinctively remember how that face looked asleep on your pillow. He sat down across from me with a careful kind of caution, as if he understood I might leave at the first wrong sentence. "Thank you for coming," he said. I nodded once. "You wanted to explain." His mouth twitched slightly, like maybe he had expected a softer opening. He folded his hands on the table. "I handled everything badly," he said. "I know that." I said nothing. I shouldn't have brought it up the way I did. I shouldn't have blindsided you. I've had a lot of time to think, and I know I hurt you. Still, I said nothing. He exhaled slowly. The trip got into my head more than I realized. The conversations, the way people were talking, the way some of them framed relationships. He shook his head. I don't know. It made me start questioning things in a way I hadn't before. That was lie number one. Maybe not a full lie, but not the truth. Because I already knew he had floated the idea months earlier. I leaned back in my chair. So this all started on the trip. He hesitated. Barely. But enough. I mean, he said, that's when it became something I actually thought about seriously. There it was. The adjustment. The revision. The subtle retreat from a clean statement into softer wording. I watched him for a moment. You're choosing your sentences very carefully. His eyes flicked up to mine. Because I don't want to make this worse. Then stop trying to manage it. He swallowed. For a second, he looked genuinely thrown, like I had cut farther into the script than he expected. I'm not managing it, he said. Yes, you are. A beat of silence passed between us. People around us were talking, cups were clinking. A milk steamer hissed somewhere behind the counter. The world kept moving with that ordinary indifference it always has when your personal life is splitting open in public. I loved what we had, he said finally, quieter now. I still do. That sentence hit me in the chest, because it was exactly the kind of sentence that used to undo me. The kind that sounded vulnerable without requiring clarity. I kept my face still. Then why risk it? He looked down at his hands. I don't know. It was the most honest thing he had said so far, and I hated him for it. Because not knowing is still a choice when you act on it. I let a few seconds pass before speaking again. Anna told me you brought this idea up months ago. His head lifted immediately. The color changed in his face so fast it was almost shocking. A person can say whatever they want about innocence, confusion, or pure motives. But the body tells the truth first. What? You heard me. He sat back slowly, the panic in his eyes tightening into something flatter. I don't know what she said. You don't have to, I do. Natalie. No, I said, cutting him off. Don't do that thing where you start with my name like it softens the lie. His lips parted, closed. Then he looked away toward the window. That movement alone told me enough. So the trip didn't create this, I said. It just gave you permission to say it out loud. He rubbed one hand over his mouth. I had thoughts, he said finally. I almost laughed. Thoughts. As if this had all emerged from the harmless weather system of a curious mind, rather than the private erosion of commitment. You had thoughts, I repeated. Yes. For how long? I don't know. How long? He looked back at me then, and I saw it. The calculation, the decision whether partial honesty would cost less than another denial. A few months, he admitted. I nodded slowly. There it was. The truth, not complete, but exposed enough to change shape in the light. He had been carrying this long before he ever said a word to me. Long before the couch. Long before that careful speech about growth and freedom. Long enough to think about it, test the language, let it settle. Long enough to stand beside me while I planned a wedding to a version of him that no longer existed. Did you ever plan to tell me before we got married? I asked. He frowned. Of course. When? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I held his gaze. That's what I thought. His face tightened with frustration. I'm here, aren't I? I'm trying to be honest now. No, I said. You're trying to do damage control now. He sat back, jaw flexing. That's not fair. The phrase barely registered anymore. It had become background noise, the favorite hymn of people who want forgiveness before accountability. I folded my hands on the table and asked the question I had come there to ask. Is there someone else? His whole body stilled. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. It was the stillness of a person whose instincts had just collided head-on with his fear. No, he said. Too fast. Again. The same speed as before. The same answer wearing a different setting. I watched him in silence. Then I said, let me see your phone. Every color left his face. He did not move. For one long, suspended second, neither did I. I had not planned to say it that directly. I had imagined circling the issue longer, maybe giving him another opportunity to tell the truth without forcing it. But the moment the request left my mouth, I knew it had been living inside me the whole time. He stared at me. What? Your phone. His throat worked. Natalie, come on. No denial. No outrage. No, that's insane. Just come on. The answer of a guilty man who wants the request itself to sound unreasonable because he knows what lives on the other side of compliance. I leaned forward slightly. If there's no one else, show me. He looked around the cafe, like maybe he could locate an exit in the room itself. This is toxic, he said quietly. I almost smiled. There it was. When honesty fails, reach for vocabulary. This, I said, is the consequence of you acting like a stranger and asking for an open relationship after 5 years. He dragged his phone out of his pocket but kept it in his hand. You don't trust me. The sentence landed between us like something dead. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said, I don't. And that, more than anything else, seemed to break whatever he had left of his performance. Because trust is beautiful when it exists, and brutal when it doesn't. Once it is named as gone, there is nowhere left for manipulation to hide. His grip tightened on the phone. Then, after a long pause, he handed it to me. I took it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me still wanted to be wrong. That is another humiliating truth people do not talk about enough. Even when your instincts are screaming, even when the evidence is stacking up, some softer part of you still hopes reality will embarrass your fear, that you will open the phone, find nothing, and feel ashamed of what pain has made you suspect. But the moment I unlocked it, I knew I was not going to get that mercy. His messages were exactly where they always are on every phone. Simple, ordinary, terrifying. I did not have to search long. There was a thread near the top with a woman whose name I did not recognize. Sophie. Just a first name. No explanation. No last name. That alone told me enough. If she had been harmless, there would have been context. A coworker's full name, a work group, a friend's label. Something designed for daylight. But Sophie sat there in the list of conversations with the quiet intimacy of someone already known in private. I tapped. The first messages I saw were not explicit enough to qualify as confession in a courtroom. They were worse because they were familiar, warm, slippery, flirty in the way people get when they are building a bridge they plan to cross later. He had responded to her selfie from 2 nights earlier with, "Your trouble." She had written back, "Only for the right person." A laughing emoji from him. Then from her, "Missed your face today." My stomach dropped so sharply I thought I might actually be sick right there at the table. I kept scrolling. There it was again. The tone, the ease, the private current moving beneath seemingly casual words. A message from him after midnight. "Wish I were there." A message from her. "You would have stayed longer this time." My fingers went cold. I scrolled further up. A photo she had sent from what looked like a bar patio, her drink on the table, her knees crossed. Caption, "Your turn next." Then him. Soon. Soon. One word. And yet somehow it carried the weight of an entire betrayal. I did not need a hotel receipt. I did not need a confession typed in graphic detail. I did not need to watch the line cross in order to understand that he had already been walking toward it with intention. I lowered the phone slightly and looked at him. He already knew. He knew exactly what I had found, because men only look that defeated when they realize the version of the story they were still trying to salvage has just died in plain view. "It's not what it looks like," he said. Of course, the oldest, flimsiest sentence in the book. I set the phone on the table between us, as carefully as if it might explode. "Don't," I said. His eyes were wet now, frantic, desperate. "It was just talking." I stared at him. Just talking. As though emotional betrayal becomes morally decorative if nobody has technically removed clothing yet. "Just talking?" I repeated quietly. He nodded too fast. "I swear, it never became anything real." My voice stayed calm, which seemed to scare him more than if I had shouted. "You called it freedom," I said. "You called it honesty. You called it growth. But this..." I touched the phone lightly with one finger. "This is what it really was. You were already halfway out of the relationship and wanted me to help make it sound noble." "That's not true." "It is exactly true." He shook his head, leaning forward now. "I got carried away, that's all. I liked the attention. I liked talking. And then after the trip, I started thinking maybe what?" I cut in. "Maybe if you got me to agree to an open relationship, you wouldn't have to feel guilty for the fact that you were already lining someone up." His face crumpled. "No, God, no, it wasn't like that." But even he no longer sounded convinced by himself. I looked at him and felt something shift inside me. Not fresh pain, not even shock. Clarity. Pure, cold, almost merciful clarity. Because the worst stage had been uncertainty. The late nights wondering whether I was paranoid, dramatic, overly sensitive, unfair. The endless mental rewinds trying to decide whether his distance meant something real, or whether I was inventing patterns to justify hurt. Now I knew. He had already opened the door. Maybe not all the way. Maybe not physically yet. But emotionally, absolutely. He had made room for another woman in the space where our future was supposed to live. And then he had come home and asked me to help him formalize it. He was still talking, still apologizing, still throwing out thin little lifelines like confusion, attention, stress, curiosity. I barely heard him. Because once the truth is visible, the excuses all start sounding like rearranged furniture in a house that is already on fire. Finally, I said, "Did you meet her on the trip?" He looked down. No, I believed that part, which somehow made it worse, because it meant this had roots before the trip too. How long have you been talking to her? A few weeks. I laughed once, sharp and empty. A few weeks, I repeated. And during those few weeks, you were still sleeping next to me, still talking wedding plans, still coming home and letting me think we were fine. I didn't know what I was doing. You knew enough to hide it. He covered his face with one hand. I'm sorry. That word again. Too late, too light, too small for the architecture of what he had broken. I stood up. He looked up immediately, panic flashing across his face. Natalie, please. I reached for my bag. No. Please sit down. No. We can fix this. That almost stopped me, not because I believed him, but because of how nakedly absurd it was. Fix this! As though betrayal were a cabinet hinge, as though trust could be tightened with the right tools and a free weekend. I looked down at him, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt no urge to explain myself gently. You don't get to flirt with another woman, ask for an open relationship, lie to my face, and then call it fixable because you got caught before you finished crossing the line. Tears spilled over then. Real tears, maybe. Or real panic. At that point, I no longer cared which. I love you, he said, voice cracking. I believed that he believed it, but belief is not the same thing as worthiness. And love, when it is selfish enough, becomes another way of asking for more than you deserve. You loved what I gave you, I said. His face went slack. You loved the stability, the history, the version of me who trusted you. You loved having someone loyal at home while you entertained the thrill of being wanted elsewhere. That is not the kind of love I can build a life on. He opened his mouth, but I was done hearing language. Done hearing careful phrasing. Done hearing him call betrayal a conversation and deceit curiosity and cowardice confusion. So I picked up his phone, put it back in front of him, and said the only sentence that mattered. You already lost me. Then I turned and walked out of the cafe. He said my name once, loud enough that a few people looked up. I did not stop. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have for that time of year. I kept walking past the window, past the corner, past the florist shop with the buckets of flowers out front, past the parking meter that had been blinking red all week, past everything that might have slowed me down long enough to feel. Only when I reached my car did I finally let myself breathe. I sat behind the wheel with both hands locked around it and stared through the windshield at nothing. Anger moved through me first, then grief, then something quieter, something steadier, relief. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. Not because 5 years suddenly meant less. They didn't. But because uncertainty was over. And uncertainty, I was beginning to understand, had been its own form of torture. For weeks I had been living inside suspicion, instinct, half-truths, polite denials, and everybody else's interpretations of what I should or should not accept. I had questioned myself more times than I could count. Now there was nothing left to question. He had shown me exactly who he was when temptation entered the room. A man who wanted the safety of commitment and the thrill of alternatives. A man who wanted to be admired for honesty after lying in installments. A man who called me his future while texting someone else soon. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. And in that moment, painful as it was, I felt the first real piece of myself return. Not the version of me who loved him. The version of me who believed herself. After the cafe, I blocked Evan before I even made it home. His number, his Instagram, his Facebook, his TikTok, though he barely used it and only ever sent me cooking videos and clips of men building cabins with suspiciously expensive tools. I blocked everything. Not dramatically. Not as a message. As a boundary. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the world had already begun doing that eerie thing it does after a personal disaster, where everything outside your pain continues as if nothing happened. Someone was walking a dog. A kid was dragging a scooter across the sidewalk. Two neighbors were arguing mildly over a parking spot with the kind of low-energy irritation that belongs to ordinary life. I sat in my car for a full minute before going inside. When I opened the apartment door, the silence that met me felt different than it had the night he left. Before, the place had felt interrupted. Now it felt transitional. Not healed, not peaceful, but no longer waiting for him. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the traces of a shared life that had not yet gotten the memo. His charger still plugged in beside the couch, his extra hoodie thrown over a dining chair, his cologne on the bathroom shelf, the spare key he always dropped in the ceramic bowl by the door. For a second, grief hit me so hard I had to grip the back of a chair. Because this was the part people do not romanticize when they talk about choosing yourself. Choosing yourself is not candlelit and triumphant in real time. Sometimes it is just you standing in socks on hardwood floors, trying not to cry, because a toothbrush exists where it should not. I thought about the cafe. The messages. Soon. That stupid, damning little word. And whatever softness had started rising in me hardened again into resolve. No, I was not going to turn this into a long, diseased ending. No more explanations. No more second chances dressed up as maturity. No more conversations designed to make betrayal feel nuanced. I walked into the bedroom, grabbed an empty moving box from the hall closet, and started packing his things. The first few items were easy. The hoodie, the charger, his watch stand. Then it got harder. A book we had read at the same time and argued about in bed. A framed photo from a winery trip. A blue mug with a chipped handle that he insisted made coffee taste better, even though that was objectively not how physics worked. Every object carried memory in it. That was the danger. Objects are traitors like that. They make pain look sentimental. They tempt you to confuse history with destiny. Twice I had to stop and sit down. Once, because I found the small stack of wedding venue printouts we had left on the dresser after a Sunday afternoon of circling prices and joking about whether we could trick people into thinking a cheaper place was intentionally minimalist. Another time because I opened the bathroom cabinet and found the extra sunscreen he used on every trip because he burned easily and then complained dramatically for 2 days, like sunlight had specifically targeted him. Grief is mean that way. It does not always strike at the biggest moments. Sometimes it arrives through sunscreen. By midnight, I had packed almost everything that was obviously his. The apartment looked barer, sharper, like a stage after one actor leaves, and the set finally reveals how much space they had been taking up. I texted him from a burner number the next morning. Pick up your things by Friday. I'll leave them downstairs with management. After that, they're getting donated. He responded in less than 3 minutes. Can we please talk when I come? I stared at the message, then deleted the burner app without answering. 2 days later, my phone started lighting up with messages from mutual friends. Not the preachy ones this time. Different people. People who sounded awkward, apologetic, a little stunned. Apparently, word had spread about what happened at the cafe. I never asked how. Maybe Evan told someone a sanitized version and left out the phone. Maybe somebody saw us. Maybe the truth leaked the way it usually does, once enough people are holding incompatible pieces of the same lie. Whatever the reason, the tide had turned. Lena sent me a screenshot first. A public story post from a mutual friend that showed Evan at some rooftop bar with a woman in a white blouse whose face I recognized immediately from the text thread. Sophie. She was leaning into him in that too casual way people use when they want the photo to seem spontaneous, even though the intimacy is the whole point. No caption. No tags. But the implication was obvious. I looked at the image for maybe 3 seconds before closing it. Not because it hurt. Not exactly. Because it confirmed everything. He had not been confused. He had not been searching abstractly for new models of emotional growth. He had been building an exit ramp while still sharing a bed with me. And now, having lost the original life, he was rushing to justify the replacement. Over the next week, more scraps of information found their way to me, even though I never asked for them. That is another thing about breakups inside overlapping social circles. Even when you choose silence, gossip still thinks it is doing you a favor. One friend told me Evan and Sophie had started showing up together almost immediately. Another said it looked forced, like he was trying too hard to make the new thing appear legitimate before anyone had time to question the timeline. Someone else mentioned she had posted a picture of a cocktail with the caption, "Finally choosing what feels right." I almost admired the shamelessness. Almost. A week after that, the post stopped. No more rooftop bars. No more glimpses of crossed knees and blurred glasses. No more quiet little public hints designed to retroactively cleanse a betrayal by making it look faded. Then the second wave of gossip started. Sophie had ghosted him, or pulled back, or decided he was more useful as flirtation than reality. The details varied depending on who was telling it, but the shape was the same. Whatever fantasy Evan had been sprinting toward had collapsed almost as quickly as he built it. When I first heard that, I waited for the rush of satisfaction people always promise you comes with karma. It did not come the way I expected. There was no cackling triumph, no dramatic sense of justice descending from the heavens, just a quiet, tired recognition. Of course it ended badly. People who begin in dishonesty rarely arrive at peace. A few of the same mutual friends who had tried to defend him earlier started backtracking. Noah texted me. "I owe you an apology. I really didn't understand the full picture." I stared at the message for a moment, then wrote back. "No, you didn't. That was all." I did not need a deeper conversation than that. I was no longer interested in helping people process the consequences of underestimating my reality. Anna called one evening and said, "I just wanted you to know, people are seeing it now." I was sitting on the floor beside the coffee table, sorting through subscription logins and old paperwork. Seeing what? That he was already halfway gone when he asked you for more patience, she said. That he wasn't being brave. He was trying to create cover. I leaned back against the couch and looked at the ceiling. "Yes," I said quietly, "I know." And I did. That was the difference now. I knew. Not emotionally all the time. Healing is never that linear. But intellectually, completely. There was no mystery left. No romantic angle I had failed to consider. No tragic misunderstanding waiting to redeem the whole thing. Just choices. His, mostly. And mine afterward. The practical untangling took another couple of weeks. I changed passwords on everything. Streaming accounts, shared grocery app, utility logins, the emergency contact on my work forms. The wedding planning spreadsheet got deleted first. That part felt less sad than I expected. More like throwing away a map to a house that had already burned down. I went through bank statements and made sure there were no lingering joint auto payments. Canceled the couple's massage gift certificate his sister had given us for Christmas. Removed him from the pet sitting rotation spreadsheet my building kept for residents, even though we did not own a pet yet and had only signed up because he said it would be good practice for commitment, which in hindsight deserved a personal award for irony. The day he came to collect his boxes, I did not meet him downstairs. I left them with building management exactly as promised. But when the doorman called up to say, "He's here," my whole body went tense anyway. Old habits, old adrenaline, old grief trying to prove it still had keys. I stood in the kitchen and listened for sounds I could not actually hear from 5 floors up. A minute later, my phone buzzed from an unknown number. I knew it was him before opening it. "I'm downstairs. Can I please just talk to you for 2 minutes?" I did not answer. 30 seconds later, "Please." Then, "I know I don't deserve it." That almost made me laugh. Deserve had finally entered the conversation, months too late and wearing borrowed clothes. I turned my phone face down on the counter and waited. A little while later, the doorman called again to confirm the pickup was done. That was it. No screaming in hallways. No dramatic showdown in the lobby. No last embrace framed by regret. Just cardboard boxes and an elevator ride. Honestly, that felt more fitting. Some endings should be ordinary, not because they meant nothing, because spectacle gives too much dignity to people who have already spent enough of your life. After that, his attempts to reach me got stranger. Different numbers. A late-night email from an address I forgot he had. One voicemail that somehow slipped through from a blocked call where he said he had made the worst mistake of his life and finally understood what real loyalty looked like. I deleted it halfway through, not out of cruelty, out of self-respect. By then, I understood something. I wish more women were taught earlier. A man realizing your value after losing access to you is not growth you are required to witness. It is simply delayed comprehension. And delayed comprehension is not the same thing as transformation. Some mutual friends kept trying to stay neutral. That word irritated me more with time. Neutral. As if betrayal were a weather pattern and not a series of decisions. As if staying socially comfortable mattered more than standing morally anywhere. At first I tolerated it. Then I stopped. One by one, I pulled back from the people who still reported on him, defended his intentions, or treated the whole thing like one unfortunate breakup between 2 equally complicated adults. No, complicated was forgetting an anniversary or falling out of sync during a stressful season. This was different. This was him auditioning alternatives while still expecting the benefits of devotion. I was not interested in sharing emotional space with anyone who needed that explained twice. So I got quieter. Smaller circle, fewer updates. More dinners with people who did not treat my pain like a debate prompt. More weekends with my family. More time in my own apartment without the low-grade tension of wondering whether love was being respected inside it. And slowly, in the stubborn, unglamorous way real healing happens, the place started to feel like mine again. I moved the chair his hoodie used to sit on, bought new sheets, rearranged the bookshelf, put the chipped blue mug in a donation box, and did not cry this time. Opened the windows. Let air in. Let silence become something other than absence. A month later, Lena came over with Thai takeout and cheap wine, looked around my living room and said, "It feels different in here." I looked around too. She was right. It did. Not because all the hurt was gone. It wasn't. There were still moments. Songs in grocery stores. Engagement ring ads I forgot how to avoid. The occasional sharp memory arriving for no reason and leaving me breathless for 10 seconds in the cereal aisle. But the apartment no longer felt like a paused argument. It felt reclaimed. I finally took the ring off for good one Sunday morning. I had stopped wearing it most days already, but I had kept it in the little ceramic dish by the sink as if part of me still needed physical proof that the whole thing had happened. That morning, I picked it up, held it in my palm, and expected to feel something cinematic. Anguish. Rage. Relief so profound it transformed the room. Instead, I felt something simpler. Completion. I dropped it into a small velvet box, shut the lid, and slid it into the back of a drawer. Not because it meant nothing. Because it did. Because it had meant too much to be left out where betrayal could keep touching it. The last time I heard Evan's name in any meaningful way was through Anna, months later. She mentioned casually that he was still having a hard time, and still telling some people he had ruined the best thing in his life. I nodded and changed the subject. Not because I was pretending to be above it, because I finally was. There is a point in some heartbreaks when the story stops being about what the other person did and starts being about what you refuse to become in response. I could have bargained with my own dignity. I could have turned his cowardice into a communication problem and called that maturity. I could have stayed long enough to let his confusion train me into accepting less than what I had already built my life around. I didn't. That was the real ending. Not the cafe. Not the phone. Not the boxes in the lobby. The real ending was the moment I stopped needing him to understand the damage in order for me to honor it. 5 years is a long time. Long enough to build habits, traditions, private jokes, future plans, and a whole emotional architecture around someone. Long enough to mistake familiarity for permanence. Long enough to think history itself can protect you from betrayal. It can't. But losing that life did not destroy me. It exposed me to myself, to the part of me that still knew the difference between compromise and corrosion, to the part of me that could grieve deeply without negotiating my own worth, to the part of me that, when it finally mattered, chose the painful truth over a contaminated future. And in the end, that mattered more than anything Evan said after the fact, because he did not lose me when I blocked his number. He lost me when he looked at loyalty and decided it was too small for what he wanted. I just happened to be the one strong enough to believe him the first time.